Hungarian Folk Tales. The Hedgehog. Once upon a time, there lived a merchant, a king, and a poor man. The merchant often went hunting in the forest, and one day he became so very lost that he wandered around for 3 whole days, unable to find his way home. He said, "Oh, if only someone would show me the way out, I'd give him the hand of the most beautiful of my 3 daughters in marriage and 3 sacks of gold. I'll show you the way out if you follow me." The merchant looked down at his feet and saw a snuffling hedgehog. Then the merchant was forced to promise the hedgehog his most beautiful daughter's hand and 3 sacks of gold if he would lead him out of the forest. Then the hedgehog set out, followed by the merchant, and they reached the edge of the forest in no time. The following day, the king also went hunting in the forest, and he also got lost, much like the merchant the day before. The king said, "If only someone would show me the way out, I'd give him the hand of the most beautiful of my 3 daughters in marriage, along with 3 carts of gold." "I'll show you the way out if you follow me." The king looked around to see where the voice was coming from and then saw the hedgehog by his feet. He was so anxious to get out of the forest that he couldn't care less who it was, so he followed the hedgehog and they soon reached the edge of the forest. The following day, the poor man also got lost in the forest. "Oh dear, I have nothing to my name, but even if an ugly beast showed me the way out of this forest, I would willingly adopt it as my own dear child." "I'll show you the way out if you follow me," a voice said. The voice, of course, came from the hedgehog, and it led the poor man to the edge of the forest in no time at all. Time passed, and the merchant, the king, and the poor man had almost forgotten about the little hedgehog. One night, after the poor man had gone to bed, someone knocked on his window. "Father dear, please open the door for me." Who can that be, the poor man wondered, because he knew he had no children. "Hello, Father, I finally come home," the hedgehog said. "Welcome, son, I'm happy you're here," said the poor man. "I am too, and would you please wake my dear mother to make my bed for me?" "Father dear, do you have 2 pennies?" the hedgehog asked. "Yes, I do, my son," said the poor man. "Well then, please go into town, and in the marketplace you'll find a very old lady selling a black cockerel." "Buy it for me," said the hedgehog. "Then go to the saddler, who has a worn-out saddle, and buy that for me too." So the poor man went into town, bought the black cockerel and the worn-out saddle, and took them home, where the hedgehog saddled the cockerel, climbed up onto its back, and rode away as fast as the wind. The hedgehog didn't stop until it reached the home of the merchant, where it said, "Merchant, sir, open the door and let me in." The merchant nearly fell over backwards when he saw the hedgehog, but he had to let it in. Then he called his 3 daughters and told them of the promise he had made to the prickly creature. The merchant's daughters cried and cried, but the hedgehog paid no attention and chose the most beautiful girl and tried to comfort her with the following words: "You are mine, and I am yours, till death do us part." But the pretty girl refused to repeat his words and cried so much that she threw herself down on the ground. But protest as she might, the girl was forced to leave home with the hedgehog. Then the merchant harnessed the horses, put 3 sacks of money into another cart, and off they went with the hedgehog proudly riding its black cockerel alongside. "Are you still crying? I am, and I will cry until my dying day." "In that case," said the hedgehog, "go back to your father." But the hedgehog kept the 3 sacks of gold and took them home to the poor man. Time passed until the day eventually came when the hedgehog saddled its black cockerel and rode off to visit the king of the land. The hedgehog told the king why it had come, hoping the king remembered his promise. "I only wish I had forgotten, but I haven't, and I always keep my word," said the king. He called his 3 daughters and sadly told them what had happened to him in the forest, and now this prickly creature had come here to pick his most beautiful daughter for his wife. "It may think I'm the most beautiful, but I refuse to be a hedgehog's wife. I'd rather die than be a hedgehog's wife. I'll be only too happy to be its wife because it was so kind to my dear father." The king was happy and sad at the same time. He was glad one of his daughters had turned out to be so kind-hearted, but was sad to lose his only kind-hearted daughter. The king loaded silver, gold and diamonds onto 3 carts, harnessed horses to the royal coach, and the princess climbed in. The hedgehog, however, did not go in the coach, but rode alongside on the black cockerel. They had been riding for many hours and were far away from the palace when the hedgehog looked into the coach and was surprised to see the princess happy and not crying. She said, "Why do you insist on riding that black cockerel instead of sitting beside me here in the coach?" "Aren't you afraid of me?" the hedgehog asked. "Why should I, when I know you will do me no harm?" she replied. "Don't you find me ugly?" asked the hedgehog. "Of course not," the princess replied. Then a miracle happened. The hedgehog shook itself and immediately turned into a tall and handsome prince who beamed brighter than the sun. Then the cockerel shook itself and turned into a fabulous stallion. And a palace appeared with walls and windows made of sparkling diamonds. Then they sent for the king, they sent for the poor man, and they sent for everyone in the land to join them at their wonderful wedding feast. And they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Gold Coin and the Hat. I want to tell you the story of 3 young men and a hat. The 3 young men were all big-bearded fellows, and one day they decided that the time had come to go out and seek their fortunes in the great wide world. They walked and walked until they came to a little village, and as they neared the village, they met an old man. And one of the young men said, "How many days are there in the world, old man?" "One less with today, young man," the old man replied. "And are there any good men left in the world?" "Roses still bloom even when they're surrounded by weeds." "Now that was clever," the young man said. "I'll ask you one more question. What does an old man have under his hat? Come to the inn, young men, and I'll tell you there." The young men were penniless, but they still went with the old man. But the old man was the first to enter, and he told the innkeeper to keep pouring them wine until they had 5 florins worth. So all 4 men took a seat at the table, and the innkeeper poured wine, and they drank it and had a very jolly time indeed. But when they had drunk 5 florins worth, the innkeeper stopped serving them and politely asked, "Now, gentlemen, who will pay for all this fine wine?" The young men would have willingly paid, but they were penniless. "So then the hat will pay," the old man said. And he took off his hat, shook it, and a gold coin fell out. The young men were very surprised by this sight and keen to get their hands on the old man's valuable hat. Then all they would have to do was to shake it, and the ground would be covered in gold coins. They pleaded and appealed to the old man to sell them his hat and to name his price. "Very well," the old man said, you can see that I am indeed an old man, and so 500 florins would be enough for the few years I have left. So that is my price for the hat, young sirs." The young gentlemen all ran to the Count and asked to borrow 500 florins, and the Count was happy to comply. So they paid the old man the price for the hat, and he went home. Then the hearty young fellows continued to eat and drink and make merry until a very late hour that night. And when the time came to pay, they shook the old man's hat, but nothing fell out. Not even a single gold coin. What were the poor fools to do? They could not pay, and so the innkeeper made them all stay and work to pay for the wine they had drunk that night. The moment the innkeeper let them go, they hurried to find the old man who had sold them the hat. "Let's go and look for him in the village, and we'll teach that old man a lesson for cheating us so." The old man got wind of their arrival and tried to hide all over the house, but his wife still found him wherever he hid. Then his wife said to him at last, "You silly old fool, don't try and hide. It's much better if you pretend to be dead. Lie on the bench and I shall put a sheet over you, and when the young men come, I shall tell them that you're dead, and they will not be able to do a thing with a dead man." So that's exactly what they did, and the wife began to weep for her dead husband. "Oh, my dearest darling husband, why did you die and leave me here all alone?" When the young men appeared, they asked the wife why she was crying so. "What happened? Why are you crying, old lady?" "How could I not cry, my dears? My husband is lying dead on the bench, and I am left here to fend for myself alone. But do not mourn his loss, for he was a terrible rogue." But then one of the young men sighted a stick in the corner of the room, and he could not resist giving the old man's body a prod. "Take that, you scoundrel, for the money you stole from us." Then the old man leapt up and put his hands together in thanks. "Oh, God bless you, gentlemen. Behold, now I believe in the miraculous power of the stick. Listen here. I was walking in the fields one day when I saw a dead dog lying there. I prodded the dead dog with this selfsame stick, and it jumped up and ran away. But now I know better than ever that this stick has the power to perform miracles. Wife, give these young men all we possess, and we will keep only this stick. Then, when a rich man dies, I will raise him back from the dead and be richly rewarded for my miraculous deed." "Not so fast," the young men said. "We don't want your possessions, we want your miraculous stick." The old man was not willing to hand it over at first, but then he agreed. "You made fools of us once before, but never again. God bless you, old man." Then the old man laughed and gave them the stick. The young men were walking back through the village when they passed the house of the Count. There they saw a hearse and 6 horses about to set off in a funeral procession. So the young gentleman asked who was about to be buried. The people told them, "Why, the young countess, of course. There you can see her mother, father, and handsome bridegroom standing behind the coffin." The young men did not waste a minute and ran up to the old countess. They demanded that she open the coffin that instant so they might raise the young countess from the dead. Then the old countess did as the young men said and promised them all the treasure she had if only they could bring her daughter back from the dead. So one of the young men approached the coffin and tapped the young countess lightly on the throat with the miraculous stick. She looked dead one minute and was alive the next. Everyone was delighted, and now they would have a wedding instead of a wake. And they all ate and drank and had a very good time. The young men received a cart full of gold for their troubles and were so happy that they even gave the old man a sack of gold when they passed his house again. Strange as it may sound, they never tried their luck with the stick a second time because they still thought that the old man might have tricked them after all. So they all went back to school to complete their studies. So that is how this story ends. If you liked it, tell it to your friends. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Magic Mill. Once upon a time, there lived a poor old man who had more children than there are holes in a sieve. His oxen were so small that they were barely any bigger than grasshoppers. The poor man and his wife spent all their days and nights worrying about how they would feed their very large family. One day, the poor man hitched his tiny 2 oxen to his tiny cart and went into the forest. The poor man was busy collecting dry branches and stacking them neatly on the back of his cart when he caught sight of a boy and a girl playing in a clearing close by, and the children began to talk to him. The poor man soon learned that the girl was the daughter of the king of the sunrise and the boy the son of the king of the sunset. As the 3 of them chatted away, the boy noticed the 2 tiny oxen. The little prince was so besotted with these miniature beasts that he begged the poor man to sell them to him. The young prince appealed and pleaded and promised the poor man that his father, the king, would reward him richly, and so the poor man eventually agreed. When the poor man arrived home without the oxen, there was an almighty argument, and his wife was so angry with her husband that he turned on his heels and left the house for the court of the king of the sunset. The poor man arrived to see the prince playing with the 2 tiny oxen. "Come, kind sir, come," said the prince, "and let me give you some advice. No matter what my father offers you, you should refuse it and insist that he gives you the magic mill in payment." So the poor man went to the king, who said, "Your 2 tiny oxen give my son such great joy and pleasure that you may have whatever you ask." Then the poor man noticed that the magic mill was on the table, and it was so very small that it looked like a child's toy. So the poor man said, "Your Majesty, the only thing I wish to have in return for my 2 tiny oxen is this tiny mill on your table." The king said, "Sir, you may have whatever you wish for, but not that." "Now then," thought the poor man, "this tiny mill isn't a toy after all, as the king does not want to part with it." The poor man humbly added, "Your Majesty, please let me have this tiny mill so that my children may also have a toy to play with." The king loved his own child very dearly, so he agreed to give the poor man the mill. Then the prince said, "Kind sir, you should leave for your home now, and when you arrive back, place the mill on the table and say, 'Magic mill, give me gold and food to eat.' And when the mill has made enough, you simply say, 'Magic mill, stop your magic now.'" The poor man was delighted with his prize. He then thanked the prince for his kindness, put the tiny mill under his arm, and hurried home so quickly that his feet never touched the ground. He was on his way home when he saw something large and black looming towards him, but he could not for the life of him guess what it was. And what do you think it was? It was a horrible, huge, black hat. Underneath the hat was a man, and the poor man joked with him and said, "Good day, good friend. Isn't that hat too tight for you?" The hatted man replied, "Instead of mocking me, sir, why don't you give me a bit of bread, because I haven't eaten for 3 days straight?" The poor man said, "But I don't have any food with me either." But then he remembered the magic mill and said, "Magic mill, give me good food to eat." The poor man had barely finished speaking when so much food appeared that there was enough to feed a village for a week. "Magic mill, stop your magic now." Then the 2 men ate and talked a while until the hatted man said, "Good sir, your mill is a magical thing indeed, but my black hat also has spectacular powers. Ask for one of anything and it will give you 2 instead. I will trade my hat for your mill." "Sir, I'm not a fool." "That's what you think. Just watch this," said the man in the hat. "Fire!" "Enough!" "Yes," said the poor man. "I see your hat is quite splendid, but a hat such as that would not save me from starvation." But the hatted man appealed and pleaded with the poor man until he eventually agreed to the exchange. when the hatted man walked away, he also left a stick lying on the ground. The poor man was left feeling cheated and sad when the stick suddenly spoke up and said, "Why so sad, master?" "I'm sad because I have lost the little sense I was born with, and I'm sad because I have lost my magic mill that I was foolish enough to swap for a hat." Then, in an instant, the stick hurried away and reappeared with the magic mill. And so the poor man had no reason to feel sad a moment longer. When the poor man returned home, his family surrounded him and rejoiced when they learned that the mill had magic powers. Days and months passed, and one day the poor man was standing at his gate when he saw the king approaching on foot with his wife and son. The poor man asked the king, "Where to, your majesty? Where are you walking on foot?" The king replied, "We're in very great trouble. The king of the north has invaded my kingdom, and I have been forced to flee my home with my beloved family. But don't be sad over such a little matter, your majesty. I will mend matters in no time at all." Then the poor man put the huge hat on his head, took the stick in his hand, and set off to find the king of the north's soldiers. It was not long before he stumbled across them, because the king of the sunset's kingdom was crowded from border to border by the soldiers. Then the poor man climbed to the top of a hill, pointed his huge black hat in the direction of the enemy and commanded, "Hat, fire!" He then sent his stick after the men to beat their behinds to make them run faster still. The carnage was incredible, and not a single soldier of the King of the North survived to tell the tale of what had happened that day. Having destroyed the enemy, the poor man turned and made his way home, where he told the king what he had done and that he could return to the Sunset Kingdom. Then the king purchased the hat and the stick from the poor man and made his way back to his royal home. So now the Sunset Prince married the Sunrise Princess. They had a wonderful wedding, and the poor man led the dancing, and if his legs can stand it, he is still dancing to this very day. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Hare and the Hedgehog. One sunny summer day, a hare and a hedgehog met in the meadow. The hare began to tease the hedgehog and said, "Hey, hedgehog, how can you even walk alone, let run with those stumpy little legs of yours?" This upset the hedgehog. "Well, I'm sure I can run faster with my little legs than you can run with your lanky long ones." Now the hare was upset. "I don't believe that." "Well, if you don't believe it, hare, let's make a wager." So the two of them placed their wagers, and then the hare said to the hedgehog, "Well then, hedgehog, shall we race?" To this the hedgehog said, "Tomorrow morning, when the 8 o'clock train leaves the station." The hare said, "But why not now, hedgehog? Because I have to go home to eat my supper. Let's meet again here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp." So the hedgehog went home. After they had eaten, the hedgehog told his wife what had happened. "Just imagine, I made a wager with the hare that I can run faster than him. the hedgehog's wife said. "Don't be foolish. How could you possibly run faster than the hare?" "Well, we'll find that out tomorrow morning." The following morning, the hedgehogs got up, ate a hearty breakfast, and went out to the meadow. They didn't go to the place where they should meet the hare, but instead stood at the other end of the meadow. Then the hedgehog told his wife to hide herself in a furrow. He told her, "When the hare arrives, you are to shout out, 'I'm already here, hare!'" Then the hedgehog walked to the far end of the meadow where he met the hare. "Hello there, hare." "Hello there, hedgehog. Are you ready to race?" "Yes, I am." "Then shall we run?" "Yes, let's run." "But how shall we run over such a bumpy field?" The hedgehog said, "It's simple. I shall run in one furrow and you in another, and so we won't bump into each other while we're racing." "That sounds like a very good idea." Then the hare stood ready in one furrow and the hedgehog in another, and the hedgehog told the hare, "I shall count, and when I get to 3, we start to run." And then the hedgehog counted, 1, 2, 3. Then they both began to run, but the hedgehog only ran 2 steps and hid himself deep in the furrow. But the hedgehog's wife was sitting waiting at the other end of the meadow when the hare arrived, and she shouted, "I'm already here, hare!" And the hare said, "That was no good. Let's race again." Then they turned back and began to run in the opposite direction, but this time the hedgehog's wife only ran 2 steps and hid herself deep in the furrow. The hare did his best to run faster than he had ever run before. But when the hare arrived back at the beginning of the meadow, the hedgehog said, "I'm already here, hare." "That was no good. Let's race once more." So they turned around and ran back again, but the hedgehog quickly hid in the furrow again. The poor hare ran as fast as his legs would carry him, and when he got to the other end of the meadow, the hedgehog's wife said, "I'm already here, hare." "That was no good," said the hare. "Let's run one last time." But the foolish hare felt dizzy and his legs began to tremble, and he stood in the middle of the meadow, too tired to continue. The little hedgehogs laughed at the silly hare. They had won. The pair of them laughed all the way home, and they are probably still laughing to this very day. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Goat Soldiers. A long time ago, in a distant land, there lived a poor lad. His mother and father both died when he was young, and he was all alone. He was poor, he had no one, and so the poor lad became a shepherd. He was still tending sheep when it came time to become a soldier. So he went straight into the army from his flock of sheep. He served his 3 years, and when he returned, he was so poor that he didn't know what to do or where to look. He had nothing to his name and hardly any clothes. There was a farmer who owned a flock of 30 goats, who needed a goat herd, who could herd the goats during the day and milk them every morning, noon and night, and keep their stable clean and tidy. The young lad happened to be passing and took the job straight away and led the goats out to the nearby meadow. But the young lad was no ordinary goat herd. He was sharp and witty and had learned a couple of clever tricks during his time as a soldier. So he talked to the goats all of the time and ordered them around in a military fashion until they learned to understand his simple commands. He marched them up and down, and by the time he was finished, he could get them to parade around the meadow like a miniature army. One day, the lad saw a rich man in a carriage riding past the meadow, so he drove the herd of goats to the side of the road, where he waved, and the rich man stopped his carriage. The lad said, "The reason I stopped you, sir, is to show you what these goats have learnt to do since I have been their goat herd." The rich man in the carriage was very impressed with their performance and asked, "Who owns these goat soldiers?" "Why, they belong to the local farmer." The rich man was so impressed that he purchased all 30 goats but insisted that the young lad should go and work for him for a month. Then the rich man invited all of his rich friends to come and see for themselves. "I want to show you something very interesting, something you've never seen in your life before." A gentleman from a foreign land liked the performance so much that he begged to buy the herd of goats. And so the rich man sold them to him. The foreign gentleman reached into his pocket and paid the price, and the rich man gave all the money to the goat herd, who used the money to buy a plot of land, build a fine house, and buy himself some good clothes, and to live a proper life like other people did. And he lived happily ever after.